I would argue that many people in this room would agree that someone representing this region and this riding must be able to clearly articulate how you balance their needs for employment, countrywide energy, and also respect for environmental factors. What is your position on oil sands development? That is the question. The first answer goes to Chris.
Thank you. It's a great question. Obviously, a question that is always top of mind here in Calgary. How do we develop the oil sands in a way that is consistent with Canada's great track record of environmental stewardship and sustainability? And what I would argue is that to begin with, what we need to do is begin having a grown-up conversation about what we are doing with our energy resources. I don't think the job of the government is to cheerlead. The job of the government is to actually lead this conversation. Right now what we have is a lot of heat and noise and flash, a lot of things being yelled back and forth across the aisle in Parliament, but very, very little in the way of wisdom, and that does not help the industry. The industry needs regulatory certainty. They need the federal government to provide the framework, the clear framework on environment, on interprovincial issues, on First Nations rights, on coastal waterways, all of the stuff that's impacted by the development of the oil sands. The government needs to clarify all of that so that everyone can work within that framework and that we have the public trust that we know we need to continue to develop the resource responsibly. To begin with, we need to get everyone back onto at the same table, agreeing on the same language and willing to move forward together. And whether we call that a national energy strategy or we choose some other phrase to describe it, we absolutely need the federal government to lead that conversation and to begin bringing in the key, the provinces, the other key stakeholders, so that we can actually figure out what we mean by the national interest when it comes to energy, what we mean by interprovincial affairs when it comes to energy. None of this has been defined by the government. It's I think a pretty terrible failure of leadership. And I think that one of the best ways that we could begin to change that conversation would be to send an MP to Parliament who would be free to speak about that once he gets there as only the second member of a caucus of two and with the agenda no longer, not yet determined. So that's really what I would like to do on the energy portfolio. The other thing that I think is critical, though, is that the energy resources we have today be targeted toward building the energy economy we know we need tomorrow. And there are so many great examples of how to do this. My favorite one comes right from one of these towers here in Calgary, a company called Greengate. And Greengate is a fantastic little entrepreneurial company that's doing wind energy development. And the way that they are building enormous wind farms here in Alberta is by selling carbon offsets to California companies that are working under a more strict emissions regime. Every time I tell that story, I think to myself, why are they not selling offsets to companies here in Alberta that have emissions profiles that are problematic? Why do we not have partnership here to begin, to take the lead on this stuff and to be able to say, you know what, we are not only leading in the energy economy of today, we are leading and building the energy economy of tomorrow. So I think that's Chris, the way forward.
Thank you. Chris Turner, Harvey Locke, what is your position on the oil sands?
Well,
we need 2 minutes.
We need more than just a conversation and some broad ideas. We need to be specific. Let's be clear, the oil sands is going to be developed. The question is how and what we could do specifically to make it better for the environment. I think there's a couple of things we could begin exploring right away. First off, we should understand that one of the biggest impacts of the oil sands is carbon. The second biggest impact is probably water. So in the Mackenzie Basin watershed, could we think about how we protect vast freshwater resources in a completely intact way as part of getting the whole big picture correct? With carbon, let's think about what the issue is. The issue is we're converting carbon and putting it in the atmosphere. That's what causes climate change. So how can we get less carbon in the atmosphere while we develop a hydrocarbon-based product? Well, there are multiple ways to look at it. We can protect and fix more carbon in the ground than if we took every automobile off the road in the world if we stopped destroying primary ecosystems around the world. I've written an article about this called The Nature of the Climate with a leading Australian climate scientist, Brendan Mackey, which you can read online. 20% of all emissions going on in the world now come from destroying primary ecosystems. Why don't we engage in stopping the destruction of primary ecosystems? We can provide resources to make that happen. Our own country is very carbon rich in the soils in the north. We can fix that in place. I worked with Jean Charest's government to get a commitment to protect half of northern Quebec, to fix carbon in the ground, to keep ecosystems intact when they were proceeding with their northern, it's called the Plan Nord. And they implemented it in public policy, and that public policy commitment to protecting half of northern Quebec survived the Marois government's change. I'm talking about very specific ideas that we can do. And then the second thing we need is we need to remember in Alberta that we used to have public policy discussions about acting like an owner. And when you own something, you get to decide the pace at which it's developed, who gets to develop it, how much of the value you want to add to it here locally, and you think about the public interest as a holistic idea. The failure that we're having now isn't just a lack of conversation, it's a lack of coherence. And the failure of coherence is that we have one-off projects springing up. Are you for this pipeline? Are you for that one? Are you for this takeover? Are you for that one? Does anybody have a clue what we're trying to achieve up there?
Thank you very much, Harvey.
Thank you.
Same question to Dan Meads from the NDP. What is your position on the oil sands? You have 2 minutes.
Great. I'm going to answer this question in 2 parts, if I can. The first part is just to address some of the things that came out. Firstly, Chris, I'm a little concerned or confused. You said 2 things that stood out for me. One is that Canada has a long, great track record of environmental stewardship, and then you said that nothing gets done, all that happens in Parliament is shouting. So I'm not sure how those 2 things fit. I'm also concerned that that Harvey thinks that the only way we need to develop the oil sands is so that it's better for the environment. I agree that we need to do oil sands development in a way that's more environmentally sustainable, but we need to do so in a way that's also more economically sustainable and more socially sustainable as well. When we talk about integrating big decisions into our public policy and into our lives, what we need to keep in mind is that each of these decisions doesn't just impact the environment, it doesn't just impact the economy, and it doesn't just impact our society, it does all of those things at once. And so, of course, the oil sands need to be developed. It needs to be developed in a way that we aren't creating problems quicker than we're creating solutions. And those problems that we're creating aren't just environmental, they're economic as well, and they're social also. We see this in a bunch of ways. The highest gender wage gap in the country is right here in Alberta, 68 cents on the dollar. The Canadian average is 83 cents on the dollar. You know, we have the highest rates of addictions and mental illness in the country. We have the highest rates of domestic violence in the country. These are the types of things that we also need to talk about when we focus on environmental issues and oil sands development. It impacts our entire lives, environmental, economic, and social, and to argue one without the other 2 isn't doing the real decision-making process justice. Thank you.